Welcome back to The Explainer. So, in our last discussion, we really unpacked the concept of cooperation in its simplest form. Today, we're taking the logical next step. We're going to see what happens when that simple cooperation is given its first systematic capitalist application. We're diving deep into Chapter 14 of Capital, the division of labor and manufacture.
To really get our heads around Marx's argument here, we're going to follow his logic step by step. We'll look at how cooperation morphs into manufacture, then we'll examine the two different ways this system actually came about. After that, we'll see what this all means for the worker, uncover a really key contradiction at the heart of it, and finally, pinpoint its ultimate purpose for capital.
Okay, so first things first. Let's build that bridge. We need to connect the general idea of cooperation, which we've already covered, to this very specific historical system that Marx calls manufacture.
Now, if you recall, we established that bringing workers together under one roof creates something new, a social productive power. This collective force is more than just the sum of its parts. And once capital buys up all that individual labor power, this new collective force belongs to capital.
And that brings us to the crucial question of this chapter. What happens when capital doesn't just bring workers together, but starts to methodically organize that social power? Well, the answer, according to Marx, is that you get a whole new mode of production, manufacture.
So for Marx, manufacture isn't just a generic word for making things. Not at all. It's a very specific historical period of cooperation. It's defined by one guiding principle, the systematic division of labor inside a single workshop, all under the command of one capitalist.
Now, Marx, being a historical materialist, knows the system didn't just pop up out of nowhere. He actually identifies two main pathways that led from older forms of production right into the age of manufacture.
The first path is basically synthesis. A capitalist gathers up a bunch of artisans from different independent crafts to make one single complex thing. The second path is the opposite. It's all about analysis. A capitalist takes one craft and breaks it down, decomposes it into a whole series of simpler, sequential steps. Let's dig into each of these.
Marx gives this first path a name, heterogeneous manufacture. Heterogeneous makes sense, right? Because it's combining all these different independent crafts. The final product is basically just an assembly of all these separate parts.
Marx's own example of making a carriage is perfect here. Think about it. You've got all these separate skills. The wheelwright, the tailor, the painter, the locksmith, they all used to be independent. The big innovation of manufacture was to bring them all into one building, where one capitalist could coordinate all their specialized work to produce one single thing, a carriage.
Now, the second form is what Marx calls serial manufacture, and honestly, this one is even more revolutionary. Here, the logic is totally flipped. Instead of bringing things together, it's about taking one thing apart. A single craft gets systematically dismantled into a whole series of steps. Marx borrows Adam Smith's famous example of pin making, or in this case needle making, which could sometimes involve over 70 different distinct operations. The entire craft of the needlemaker is analyzed, it's broken down, and each tiny little step is given to a different worker who does nothing else. Drawing the wire, cutting it, pointing it, each one of those becomes a person's entire life's work.
So this new way of organizing work, especially the serial kind, has a pretty devastating effect on the worker as a person. It doesn't just change their job, it fundamentally changes who they are.
The well-rounded artisan who could make something from start to finish is gone. In their place, we get what Marx calls the detail laborer. This worker gets incredibly good at one tiny, repetitive task, but it costs them everything else. They lose their other physical and intellectual skills. They essentially become a living part of the workshop's machinery, a human cog.
And here's the crucial outcome of that. The individual worker no longer actually produces a commodity. Think about it. The labor of the person who just puts the head on a pin all by itself produces nothing that you can sell. It's only the common product of the whole group, the collective laborer, as Marx calls them, that actually becomes a commodity.
To really hammer home this human cost, Marx quotes the philosopher Adam Ferguson. Now, what's significant here is that Ferguson was a contemporary of Adam Smith.
This shows that the critique of the division of labor, this idea that it creates a sort of unfree, diminished population, is just as old as the economic celebration of it.
This distinction between the collective worker and the individual worker, well, it leads us to one of the biggest contradictions that Marx identifies in capitalism.
Marx lays out this incredibly sharp contrast. You look out at society as a whole, and the division of labor looks like anarchy. It's the chaos of the market, right? All these independent producers competing with prices going all over the place. But then, you step inside the workshop and it's the absolute opposite. It's pure despotism. A rigid, ironclad plan forced on the workers by the absolute authority of the capitalist. The workers are just cogs in that machine.
This gets Marx to what he sees as a central hypocrisy in bourgeois thinking. Why is it that this top-down authoritarian planning inside the factory is praised as progress, as a source of wealth, but any hint of conscious social planning outside the factory is immediately shot down as a threat to liberty? It's a fascinating ideological contradiction, and he really wants us to wrestle with it.
This brings us to the why, the ultimate goal of this whole system. We've seen how manufacture works, but now we have to ask, to what end? What's the real purpose behind all this?
And Marx is crystal clear on this point. The manufacturing division of labor isn't some natural, timeless law of production. No, it is a very specific method created by capital for capital with one single overriding goal.
And that goal is the production of what Marx calls relative surplus value. Let's be precise here. You might remember that absolute surplus value comes from just making the working day longer. Relative surplus value, on the other hand, is about something different. It's about shortening the part of the workday the worker needs to earn their wage by making labor more productive.
Okay, let's trace this logic really carefully. Step 1. The division of labor makes everyone more productive. Step 2. Higher productivity makes commodities cheaper to produce. Now, Step 3 is key. This includes the stuff workers need to live, their food, their housing, their means of subsistence. As that stuff gets cheaper, the value of labor power itself actually falls. Step 4. This means the worker now needs less time to earn back the value of their wage. Maybe before it took 6 hours, now it only takes 4. And finally, Step 5. If the workday is still, say, 12 hours long, that means the part of the day that is unpaid surplus labor for the capitalist just got bigger. It went from 6 hours to 8. That is the essence of producing relative surplus value.
So we're left with this powerful paradox. Manufacture is a system that perfects the collective laborer for the benefit of capital, but it does this by crippling the individual laborer, turning them into a fragment of a man. It generates incredible wealth and productivity, but it does so through what Marx would call an artificially produced social poverty. That is the true function of manufacture.
And so Marx's analysis from the 19th century leaves us with a really provocative question for our own time. This logic of decomposition, of taking skilled work, breaking it down into simple, monitored, optimized tasks, that was the big idea of the 18th century workshop. So where do we see that same logic today? Is it in the algorithms that manage gig economy workers, the scripts the call center employees have to follow, the fragmented tasks of the digital assembly line? It really seems the question of the detail laborer is as relevant now as it ever was.